hatred and violence that they keep around. And everything is gonna be There was me, that is Alex, and my 3 Drews, that is Pete, Georgie, and Dylan. We sat in the cool of a nightbot trying to make up our razoo dogs what to do with the evening.
Motherfucking Orthodox Guy, motherfucking Doc Guy. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Hey, Arthur, what happens when you bring 9 soldiers from Brooklyn together?
If we don't stick together, we're not gonna get anything done.
What is up, everybody? How are you doing? I am so sorry for being late, but mi madre needed help, and family comes first. Thank you all. How are you guys doing? Let me send Chuck the link just in case he wants to join. Send it to Gar as well. I actually want to talk about some current event stuff. So that's probably what we're going to be doing. To be honest. I was on 10th Man. I was on 10th Man's. So... But Garion, the GOAT, actually, I keep forgetting that I have to do this on the web browser, my Telegram. So there's actually something I like to talk about, or want to talk about, and it just popped in my head because I saw this randomly going on. Like this random video on Facebook while I was just, I wasn't really doom scrolling. Like, I wasn't really doom scrolling, but like, on my phone, my Telegram got disconnected from my, desktop. Hold on one second. I gotta reactivate it on my desktop, which is retarded. But it is what it is. Alright, I should be logged in now. There we go, here it comes. So Garion sent this badass video to me. Well, I asked him to strip it from Facebook, but with the talks in Alaska, because and Jay had asked me, and I'm talking about Jay Rillo for those of you who don't know. Like, I haven't really been into politics lately for like the past month and a half, 2, maybe 3 months. Like, really into politics. But with all of the crazy bullshit that has been said about the peace talks and, offing Putin, I want to talk about something that I remember. I don't know if it's Mandela effect or if it's just changing tides or what. But I remember when the world celebrated Russia and saw them as like the good guys, because people forget we fought in the global war on terror with Russia, not like against them, but they were our allies. Oh, hold on, let me change my name. Let me change my name back to Orthodox Guy. Yeah, y'all wouldn't understand that. That's obscure. But yeah, like, and this is kind of crazy to me, and I will probably re-go over this when Chuck gets here, because he just messaged me saying he'll be here in a minute. Like, check this out. Like that gentleman was praised. I see you. I see you. Ike, give me 1 second. I'm trying to pull this up. And like that gentleman that we just witnessed was like praised around the world for being a war hero. What's up, Ike? How you doing?
Salute. Go ahead.
So like explanation, and this is an explanation. This was in the context. And I'm gonna add that video to a short because I like the guy. He's kind of badass, and I'm gonna butcher his name, but he is a Lieutenant Alexander Prokovanka. He was a Russian soldier during the Syrian civil war. Now, mind you, Russia and the U.S. was aiding Syria during their civil war, and they were fighting ISIS. In March 2016, he was surrounded by ISIS militants in the ancient city of Palmyra while carrying out a mission to gather intelligence for an airstrike. Realizing the severity of the situation and that he might not survive, he made a self-sacrificial decision to call in an airstrike on his own position, ensuring that militants would be wiped out even at the cost of his own life. Despite being surrounded and heavily outnumbered, I can't say his name, Prakimko remained calm, transmitted his coordinates, and ordered the airstrike. His courage and selflessness was later recognized as an extraordinary act of heroism. His actions not only saved many lives, but also dealt a severe blow to ISIS forces in the region. His final words before the airstrike: "Fire on my position for my homeland." And like, that's kind of badass, but I'm not even really trying to hero worship this gentleman. I bring this up to talk about, look at the crazy shit. I'm gonna try to do a Google. I'm gonna try to do a quick Google search for the craziest things said about the Russia. Like, people are chomping at the bit. Like, politicians and warhawks are chomping at the bit for World War III. It seems with Russia and the Chi-coms, you know. And there was a time that Russia could have been a friend to the U.S. and the relations with Russia that we have now after the fall of the Berlin Wall are 100% on us. Well, you can't really say 100% on anything, but they're heavily skewed to our fault, and it's kind of crazy because their response to 9/11 was to give us aid and help us in the global war on terror. Man, there's a teardrop monument that they sent over in recognition of 9/11. The Trump Putin meeting. Like, people were talking about, like, hopefully Trump would off Putin at the fucking meeting that they had in Alaska for the peace talks. Like, that was like the craziest talking point to me so far. Well, when I look up the craziest talking points, it tries to, because I use Brave, it gives me the left and the right, so I get basically Fox and then everybody else on the left. and Fox is just as bad liars. So this is what the AI is saying. I was looking more for the tweets, things like the tweets that were said. Let me see if I can find some because it's been a few days, so Twitter may have moved on for the cycle. But apparently, Putin did back the claim that the 2020 election was rigged due to mail-in voting. That's kind of funny. But like I don't get. To me, NATO only exists to antagonize Russia. Once the fall of the Soviet Union happened, there really was no need for NATO to continue. Like I don't understand the point in NATO. We spend way too much money on NATO. We are antagonizing Russia. We are. I mean, I'm not a Russian shill. I wish I got that Russian money. That would be my problem solved. You know, be get super rich being a fucking Alex Jones for Russia. But no, like I don't get it. Like I don't get why the American media in general, because it's not just CNN, it's not just like the left, it's literally Fox News, and it's conservatives and Democrats, it's liberals and like even the alt right is like Russia are the bad guys, and that, like I just don't get it. Maybe you could tell me how I'm wrong.
No, well, so when it comes to things like this, it's all about context. In other words, it's not about, oh, a right or wrong or whatever, because these things are about relationships. And when you talk about context, depends on when you start drawing the line. How far back do you want to go? You know, do you want to go all the way back? For example, you said something about 9/11, right? So you can start drawing the context from there, like, oh, see how they helped us in 9/11, and then somebody might decide to then draw the context in another kind of time or space wise, right? However, context, the more you are able to elaborate upon this, the more other people are able to come to an informed opinion, right? So I would add to some of the things that you have said regarding, for example, the expansion of NATO, right? So we, the United States, that is, and its allies, won, if you will, and it was a spectacular victory in the sense that the Soviet Union came down without the firing of a shot, right? So, and this is, in other words, I mean, this is a nuclear confrontation, right? This kind of stuff does not typically happen, whereby this particular empire crumbles and there was no ridiculous amounts of violence. Yes, there were proxy wars all through the Cold War, if you will. If you even go further back to Stalin, you know, really defeating Hitler, right? They took the biggest blows and all that kind of stuff, right? Point is, sure, there was a heated debate, if you will, called the Cold War, and they fell. However, it could be argued that America then humiliated Russia in a manner that is not particularly wise. Now, why is it not wise? Okay, because Russia has their blame in this as well, and by Russia I mean the Eurasian Empire, all the way to the czars and whatnot.
Yeah.
They consider themselves to be a providential power, the land empire, if you will. You know, the place that Stalin was from, for example, like in Georgia, is closer to Iran than Moscow. You know, so they had a vast expanse in terms of like territory, and they've been doing their thing in the Eurasian area for a long time. This is their territory. This is what they do, right? So they see themselves in a particular kind of way. And I'm talking about the spirit or the grace that one extends a people like that, right? You don't want to make them feel, you don't want to embarrass them. Now, the truth is, though, and forgive me for kind of weaving here, right? But I'll tie it all together. The truth is, with regards to the Russians having their own fault in this, in the sense that they've always had this ambition seeing themselves, perhaps rightfully so, as a providential power, the same way that the West looks at itself, or the way China looks at itself, right? Like, we are the people, the Middle Kingdom, that kind of a thing. The Eurasian Empire, ruled by the czars, see themselves that way as well, right? Whether it's in the manifestation of the czars or in the Soviet Union, or whatever. So their error is that they don't know that, okay, well, the West is unbeatable in a particular way. Meaning, you can say all you want, but still you can't beat the dollar, the English language, and the technology, the economy, and all these other kinds of things of what we call the West, these set of institutions called the West. And the West is not something that is about uh, race or ethnicity. For example, Russia is white, but it's not Western. Japan is not white, but it is Western, right? So it's a particular set of institutions and spheres of influence, if you will, right? So Russia needs to calm down regarding the fact that the West is just too strong to beat. But the West also, having secured this victory without any catastrophe, should have calmed down and not embarrassed the West, Russia, by continuing to expand NATO in a way that was just kind of crazy. There's this famous statement where I think it was in 2008. A Russian diplomat said, "Niet means niet," right? That no means no, regarding, especially specifically with Ukraine and NATO expansion, right? So things could have been managed in a particular way whereby Russia did not feel like they were constantly getting slapped in the face, even though they helped us in, after 9/11 and all these other kinds of things. So what have I said so far? A, you're not crazy, right? B, context matters, and you can draw these different contexts. I've drawn context to be able to situate the Eurasian Empire vis-a-vis their self-view as a providential power in that space, and the kind of psychology that goes along with that. I've situated things such as, whether you go for World War II, or you go to aspects of the fact that the Cold War was settled without real catastrophe, and then there was a kind of an understanding regarding Ukraine, the expansion of NATO and whatnot. And then there's this kind of hubristic expansion and poking the bear, if you will. On the other hand, Russia needs to understand that, look, you're not going to beat the West, right? It doesn't matter how you see yourself, okay? And everything is contained within time, right? Maybe 200 years, 500 years, when this particular West, what we call the West, is gone. Maybe you can have your time then. Or maybe it's fine just playing along, being second fiddle and whatnot, right? So these are the contexts that I would add in this so far to begin with.
I like that, but I think that as technology increases and populations grow and then collapse, I think that the rapid, tail end you said that like in 500 years, I think that it's going to be more 50, 25, 50, maybe sooner. I think that the institutions that we have are very corrupt. The context that we talk about, like, I think the only context that we really have for why they keep antagonizing Russia is the military industrial complex, is the need for war materials, research. Like, I don't see any other reason. I really don't.
Yeah, elaborate on that if you don't mind, and also
Well,
you go ahead.
war they say war is a racket, right? And me, with my political ideologies, I don't think the military industrial complex is a bad thing, right? But when you have the infrastructure, the corporate relations, and the amount of money spent on war material, like, Raytheon's tagline should be, "It ain't gonna bomb itself," like, these companies hold so much sway in our economics that if they aren't constantly selling these weapons to our government, it could collapse a large portion of our economy. And if our government doesn't need it, they're not going to buy it. So they're manufacturing the need and the fear, in my opinion. Instead of just stockpiling and preparing for another war, they're trying to manufacture scarce. It's kind of like whenever a new Democrat president comes in, all these leaders have stocks in these gun companies, and they run the "we're going to ban the guns" routine, which everybody goes out and buy guns, drives up the stock price of these gun manufacturers, and everybody makes a profit.
Yeah, so basically, obviously, yes, there is a military industrial complex. With regards to the poking of the bear, for example, I mentioned one can imagine that there's just a hubristic nature to this. But beyond the hubris, there is a lot of profit to be made by the expansion of NATO and the selling of these things to them, and and this notion of the American century. And by the way, these are not when I say things like this, I always like to say that these are not questions of judgment, right? I started out by saying these are contexts, right? Because this is not some kind of simple mathematical equation. You're going to throw it in your spreadsheet and come up with, quote unquote, the right answer. Right? You're a fucking idiot if you think that's the case, right? It's the question of just looking at the context and looking at perhaps mistakes that were made and looking and not trying to, don't fall for the sunk cost fallacy. Like, oh, I've already started going down this route, so I'm just going to go all the way. What the hell is all the way? You're gonna fight the Russians to the last Ukrainian, right? You're gonna sacrifice all the Ukrainians, and because we're not gonna go, quote unquote, all the way with the Russians, for example. But meanwhile, while you're fighting the Russians to the last Ukrainian, there's a lot of money to be made, and there is this. There's the neocon / neoliberal foreign policy establishment that is permanent, part of what some people may call the deep state, that just benefits from things being a particular way. One of the things that was said about Trump in a derogatory manner, but I thought was brilliant of him, which is an attitude that he has in general, is to ask, why do we still have NATO? Right? Because it is the case that, in institutions tend to like grow, just like human being, just like life, right? It is there. They want to survive and grow. We know all the examples. I'm sure you do, Orthodox Guy, of government budgets whereby even if they end up just spending the money they have so that they can get the money next year, right? You know what I mean? Even if it's waste, right? This is a tendency of
constantly expanding.
Constantly expansion. And if you're not, let's say, within an ecosystem, like an economy where there's free competition, or an ecosystem where there's also free competition, whereby survival of the fittest and whatnot, there's just going to be this idea of never questioning why certain things are in place. So the fact that Mr. Trump said, well, why the hell are we still doing this NATO thing? The people were like, oh, how dare you ask that? But it's like, in the real world, you fucking ask shit like that. You come in, you take over some corporation, and you go from ground up, zero-based budgeting, as they call it. Why is this there? And why are we spending money on that? And by the way, why aren't these guys paying their fair share of these other kinds of things, right? So the notion of just continuing to expand, continuing to keep things the way they are, and then who benefits from it and all these other kinds of things is something that is part of government. Now, having said all that, it is the case that if you're going to overturn certain things, in other words, there is an institution, there is an order, post-World War II order, that makes sure that the Straits of Hormuz is protected and oil flows freely through here and weapons flow freely over there, and there's no disruption in the normal living of the people whom have power and whom want to keep commerce going. And we're going to establish the petrodollar over there in the Middle East, and we're going to put bases around there. This particular order, right, which the United States established, along with the United Nations, and these other kinds of things. Now, as with any kind of order, it grows, it starts to atrophy, no, not atrophy, starts to calcify and become corrupt and become incongruent with the changing landscape, right? And this is the way of ecosystems. However, if you're not subject to the competition that the ecosystem is kind of throwing at you, and you just keep things going, like NATO is there because NATO is there because NATO is there. Who cares, right? This is what we do. Then you end up in situations like this where, in order to make these changes, they're dangerous. That's why these are not easy changes to be made. Not like, oh, you just go and now that we've seen that some things are kind of corrupt and whatnot, let's just go take a hammer at it. No, not necessarily. It's not that simple. As a matter of fact, maybe you don't want to disrupt this particular order, baby with bathwater type of analogy is what I'm getting at here, right? There's this particular orders with the shipping and the weapons and all these other kinds of things that need to stay in place. However, there's just been a set of crusts built on top right? Of institutions that are just corrupt and grifting happens, and people depend on that for the the largesse, if you will. So yes, this is all adding to that aspect of the military industrial complex that you mentioned.
A couple things real quick before I give my reply or continue the conversation. I'm sorry, Lauren. I didn't mean to abandon you over at 10th Vans. It is mod abuse. And Crab, I'm sorry. My mom needed help. I didn't mean to be late. um, but that's kind of the thing, right? And what gets me is in order to justify NATO, like the one war that I can think about that Russia perpetrated in my lifetime that just feels like aggressive expansion was the Georgia conflict, in which they attempts. I think the attempt was to re-establish control over Georgia. The thing is, like, that's the one aggressive expansion. Like, that's the one reason. That's the one reason where I don't see where their intentions line up. For their own national security, they asked or they demanded that their red line in the sand was no expansion of NATO closer to Russia. The U.S. shit all over that after giving guarantees that they wouldn't. So, in order to keep Ukraine and other territories at bay from joining NATO and to see what they can get away with, of course they're going to invade and create buffer states in Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine's a horrible place. Like, it was the child sex trafficking capital of the world, the organ harvesting capital of Europe, and like it's where all of our politicians went to launder their money. People point to the Middle East, the Cayman Islands, and all these island accounts. Ukraine. There were several reasons why attacking Ukraine was good for Russia and bad for the U.S. and its allies. Now, the European, the Western world has double, triple, and quadrupled down on this antagonization of a nuclear power. People are talking a bunch of shit about Russia because the war isn't, quote unquote, going too good for them, right? My argument, what's up, Panfusa? My argument is these are not goat herders. These are near peer competitors. The only thing that Ukraine doesn't have that Russia does is a navy. But this is near peer competitors with an air force and the same heavy equipment that the Russian military has. You're seeing the future battlefield for the future wars if nation states that are near peer competitors go to war. You're going to see intense, hellish urban combat, and in the countryside, you're going to see trench warfare, drone, and severe drone usage, both in the urban and rural combat, as well as in naval combat, because that's how Russia's been able to counter the much larger, more well-equipped Russian Navy.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Not
it's
a,
hellacious.
yeah, not even to include the fact that if without NATO, without NATO involvement, Ukraine would have been collapsed within a week. And the fact that Ukraine has not really been able to push back as far, even with almost every single NATO country involving themselves in that war financially and with supplies, shows how what's the word I'm trying to use? How I don't even know what the fuck I was going to say. It shows how just how intense this war is fighting. And right now, if you look into the Ukraine war, the line of the Ukrainian troops is starting to falter significantly. They're not just one continuous front line; they're little pockets fighting back. But it's the Ukraine war. Personally, I would say might come to an end within the next year or two, because the Ukrainian supplies and front line is starting to collapse, and there will be a major push Um,
You couldn't. You just couldn't help yourself, could you?
I didn't say. I did say it. I
How do
didn't
I
say it.
slip the nigger in there? You know?
I didn't say it. I said Mager, like M, but major collapse on the front line is going to see a significant Russian push.
What was very funny about that, right? The funniest aspect of that was you weren't even trying to say the hard ER. You were trying to say major and bigger at the same time. That's what's the funniest part to me about it.
Good way to get the fucking stream accidentally taken down, but fuck.
That's why I have to mess with you about it, because like there was no racism even intended, and you just like, you know what?
It's in my genes. It's in my fucking blood. But it's
All right, let's go ahead and get back on topic. Hashtag cancel.
hashtag canceled. Yep, it's over.
I heard my neighbor.
We're done. Oh, I'm not trusting the plan. Oy vey,
Alright, so
One just before you continue, OG, you did mention something about people piling on, right? This is something that, in other words, there are certain phrases for example, NPC and all these other kinds of things. We kind of say it, we see it, we believe it sometimes, but then we act as though we forgot. And 2020 was a good time to kind of show, I'm just talking about the human nature, the mimetic nature of human nature, meaning, monkey see, monkey do, not thinking or whatever, right? And we're all obviously subject to the same kind of hardware and software. It's just a question of degrees. But for the most part, the system works by mimicry of hatreds and mimicry of desires. So it's not a question of, let me think back and create context and all this bullshit I've been saying. It's let me pile on when it's the mob shit. It's the he without sin cast the first stone. And once the first stone is cast, then the person throwing the 10th stone doesn't even know what the fuck was they're throwing stones about, right? They just, and by the 100th stone, it's just mania and ridiculousness, right? The madness of crowds, if you will. And by the way, am I echoing? Am I causing issues with my mic, or is that someone
I
else?
believe
Anyway,
that is the bread man.
that is the bread, man.
Is there an echo in my?
It's all that bacon.
I think you're kneading some bread, or you're whatever you're doing. It's coming through because it sounds like you're preparing something to be cooked.
No, I'm not. I'm just sitting on my couch. It might be my fan, but I don't know. Is it any better now?
Yes.
No, I think it's yeah, it's all good. It's all good. But yeah, just to land the plane on that, I believe that it should be always restated, renoted, and make sure that it is part of your daily understanding regarding human beings that they're not thinking, they're piling on, right? And they're just going to continue doing this kind of thing. And if it's this person today, it's the next thing tomorrow, and they're gonna. And what sounds like thinking, in other words, you're a Russian shill. You're putting. These are not thoughts. These are large language models. In other words, it's like, how's it going? It's like, good morning. How are you doing? What? And people just kind of go back and forth. That's a large language models type stuff. Which, by the way, I think we're starting to learn that we're mainly just large language models for the most part, in terms of if you want to aggregate and generalize regarding human communication and quote unquote thinking, right? So you see people just regurgitate stuff. They will do the pylons. They're not thinking in this contextual way and whatnot. And this is by far the majority. I mean, over 80% of people. And this is how the species, and it's not a bad system. It's called being a social animal, right? We're not isolated cats. That's a different hardware and software. The human hardware and software is the most mimetic based. We copy more than anything else. That's how culture propagates. Hence, we just need to be aware of that when we see some bad manifestations of the same thing.
I like that. And welcome to the show. How are you doing, Imperious? Is that you?
Doing well. I'm doing well. I agree with him a little bit about the dichotomy he's talking about, but I would also say this. I think we're at a time when it's no longer about convincing people. Like, if you notice when I'm on here, I don't convince. I could go on diatribes. I could put dossiers together. I could put together a research paper on things that I would like to explain to people and still be right. It doesn't matter. Most people, I would say 97+% of people on the internet are not there to actually know or discuss anything in a good faith manner. They're there to spew their own bullshit because they're autistic and they have no friends. So they desperately want someone to hear the bullshit in their brain. Like that's what, and so you don't conversate with these people. You break them down and reform them in your own image. Like it has, that's what I'm saying. Like it's not about discussions with these people. Like we're skipping 10 steps where most people can't walk and chew gum at the same time, don't have the gray matter capacity to understand deductive logic. And so you can't explain these. Like every show I go on, it is a assertion based off nothing. I hear complaints about women. I hear complaints about violence. I hear complaints about money. I hear complaints, but they don't have the capacity to even understand the topic to which they're trying to analyze. So it's not worth talking. You just put them up and make them follow. 99% of humans in human history have followed. We have given stupid people too much free time to think. People don't have, like, knowledge is a scary thing to give to the unable. How can you possibly implant abstract thoughts into people that don't even understand the paradigms of reality, that can't explain why what they see is real? How can they prescribe that slavery is wrong? Why is slavery wrong? Because it's just wrong and I don't like it. And I an emotional animal that needs to be whipped. This is what I'm saying. They think, but they don't have the capacity to think. So it's just like a child sitting in a toy store's aisle, crying and screaming. They don't know why they're crying. They're just screaming and crying. There's an old saying, men must be ruled. Not always justly, sometimes harshly, but ruled nonetheless. That's all, man. Like that's discuss. This is why Newton, Tesla, the greatest minds in human history, saw most human beings as a disease, a parasitic organism. Like most people should not be around. For most of history, we had things called war. So that's why I do what I do. That's why when I argue with Flo on that, do you think I really care if he thinks I'm an attorney or not? I have millions of dollars. I don't care what he thinks. But it's better for him. Wants to think so that I can manipulate him. So I'm saying, like, people are just dumb. Like you can't fix genetic inferiority. You can't. Just like there's not many LeBron Jameses 6'9", 260 that can run like that and move. There aren't many people that can actually think. That's all I wanted to say, guys.
I'll pick up a couple of threads, or if OG you wanna.
No, you go ahead. All I have is a video that Lauren posted.
Okay,
It's
okay.
a war in the Ukraine. I'll let you go ahead.
I'll pick up a couple of threads here. Number one is regarding the genetic differences or just differences amongst the individuals. You see, within this space of let's say physical, right? Height and this and that. As a matter of fact, it's not that crazy. In other words, if you gather a room full of 1,000 people, in terms of average height, and you bring the tallest person in the world, it's not going to change the average that much. However, when it comes to intellect and spirit, right? Especially in this spirit aspect, which is just more than just raw IQ power. There's something else going on there. Then it is, I don't even think it's measurable, right? The vastness, the gulf between people, right? In terms of the right tail of the curve, if you will. It's insane, right? Like it's similar to some areas, and I think it's a reflection, by the way, of these areas, such as the arts, for example, where Stephen King sells all the books, and then there's everybody else. In other words, in that room of 1,000 authors,
on every field, you know what's really scary? Every field of, let's say, okay, you look at basketball. I'll just throw a sport out there, okay? Did you know that basketball, only about 3% of the U.S. population even can have the shot to be in the NBA? NBA is the hardest sport to get into because you have to have certain genetic traits. It doesn't matter how much you could you have to be that tall or you can't get in. And the thing that is most funny is that even within that dichotomy of that only that little people can get in there, the awards and the overall chunk of ability within that category is consumed by the 1 to 4% within that NBA community. That's what people, you see, this is, I don't know if you guys, I mean, you guys took statistics, I'm sure, in college, but if you look at the 66, 95, and 99.7 standard deviation adjustments, the difference between someone with at the high end of the 2 standard deviations, the 99.7%, compared to the mean or the mode, you're looking almost at a different species in intellectual ability. Like the difference between them is far greater than the difference between someone who's at the 99.7% athletic ability and the norm. That's what's scary. Is the gap, like you said, between intellect and physical ability is immeasurably even bigger. That's what's scary.
Yeah, correct. That was one aspect that I was going to point out there, that, you gave the physical example, and I'm saying that within intellect, and then there's this other thing, which is, you could call it, I said spirit, but psychological development, which, by the way, is not just a raw IQ thing, because I'm sure you've seen some smart people, but they just, they don't have certain skills, psychologically speaking, cognitive wise, or the combination of which I tend to call spiritual for certain reasons.
There's a difference between a savant and a autistic person. Like an autistic person is incredibly intelligent, but they're not a savant. A savant is able to manipulate, change, create paradigms, actually change the physical universe around. An autistic person may be incredibly intelligent, but they don't know how to explicate that. They can't explicate that in the real world. It's like the Rain Man movie.
The second thing I wanted to just kind of say on a couple of sentences on, and then OG, you can go ahead with your video, is you mentioned breaking and reforming into your own image, and then people have their own styles of doing that. But one thing that I've noticed is, and this happens over and over and over again in certain quote unquote conversations that happen, right? And then I have the people who are smart enough to see what I'm doing, and then they say, "Oh, but you really didn't have a conversation with them. You rechange. You in other words, I switched the frame to meet whatever needs I wanted to meet." It's almost like a magician, casting spells, building, drawing some polygon shape, and then entrapping them in that box, saying what I need to say within that box, transferring that box into some other place, and then I send them off on their way, right? So the ability to frame shift, and without thinking that one needs to actually meet people where they are, is one way in which I completely agree with you regarding the reshaping of them, beating them, whatever. I'm not going to do what you do regarding, actually hitting them in the head verbally with a mallet. But I'm just going to come in. I'm going to see some bullshit that they're in. I'm going to just touch them, hypnotize them, shift the frame, and send them on their way, right? That kind of shit.
Yeah, I just refer to like the Borg on that. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Like you are now ours. Like that's what I'm saying. Like I don't take it light. Like that's the thing. Most people can be programmed just like a computer, and you take them and you must form them how you want them to form, like you would a child. Like that's the reality of what we deal with most of the time here in the real world. especially on the internet. Just like I saw like that guy Paul the other day. I've dealt with him on all these people can be formed and molded to how you want them to be molded. These people are like, remember, there's the whole idea of the tabula rasa, the blank slate, that the human mind is very easy to
You guys keep going. I gotta
write
take the
over like a
dog out
painting,
real quick.
like a painting canvas. Anyways, I gotta run to the store real quick. I'll be right out, but good talk, dude. All right, good job, man. All right, I'll be back on in a little bit.
All right. So OG is gone and Imperius is gone. I'm going to. It's
No,
going to
I'm
be
not
the Ike
gone. I'll be
ramble.
back. Just give me like 10 minutes. I just gotta
Yeah,
run to
just
the
gotta
store.
take the dog out. I'm gonna let him outside.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. Take the dog outside. Anyways, I'm going to recapitulate a couple of things regarding the topic here at hand, right? And the topic at hand being the piling on, being called a Russian shield because perhaps you don't necessarily want to see people go to World War III and nuclear annihilation. Being called a shield for Putin, being called Tim Pool or Alex Jones or whatever, simply because you're asking questions like, okay, well, if the case was reversed and the Russians or some communist bloc were putting their troops in Mexico because of the notion of free association, right? Free association. Mexicans want us to bring our troops in there to your backyard. What would we do? As a matter of fact, we've seen the example with the nuclear crisis in Cuba, right? The Cuban nuclear crisis. There was a similar thing that happened then, right? So one needs to think critically regarding this blind support for military-industrial complex, blind support for people whom a couple of years ago would say no wars, no wars, no wars, and then all of a sudden they want to vote for every war. They've never seen a strike that they don't like, right? And this is something that, say what you will of Donald Trump. He generally seems to be a peacemaker type of person and hasn't really, and this is not about Trump, by the way, but this is about the general notion of people piling on. And I'm going to recapitulate a couple of things regarding the fact that we kind of had an idea, gentleman's agreement, of not expanding the NATO in a way that kind of, thumbs and noses on the Russians. Now, here's the issue. In Russia, you have Vladimir Putin, you have a dictator, and you have, by certain necessities and the mechanisms of being a dictator, you're going to have an incompetent cadre of people that surround you, right? Because you need full loyalty. And you're going to have a bunch of yes men, I believe is the way that people tend to say that, right? So, and this cadre of yes men keeps getting smaller and smaller, and you keep getting in a tighter and tighter corner. And you want to see yourself as this great empire, as Mr. Putin said, the worst catastrophe in history was the fall of the Soviet Union and all these other kinds of things. But because he does not allow for what we may call democracy, or in a certain kind of way, a certain kind of liberalism whereby there are political options, you're going to end up with the inability to actually have a strong state. Now, there is something between the strength of a state and the strength of a dictator, which tend to be inversely correlated, meaning a strong dictator tends to kill the strength of the state, because the state is a set of institutions which need to be, shall we say, fairly independent, able to think for themselves, and with a long view in mind as to the good of the people. And when you're a dictator, and maybe you're doing it for family rule or something like that, you tend to undermine the strength of the state. OG, I don't know if you're back, but when you're back, go ahead and chime in here. If not, I will continue here with my silly, boring lecture. Now, this idea we have seen in many instances, and the fall of the Soviet Union was a good example of a great dictator, right? Stalin, one of the greatest dictators that ever existed, creating a strong personal rule, but leaving a carcass within the body of the state, right? Because it was all about this one person. It's not building of institutions that will last, and it's not the creation of independent thinking, non-yes men within your cadre of, shall we say, ministers or whatever. So there is an inverse correlation between the strength of personal rule and dictatorship and the strength of the state. So when Stalin left, it didn't take a few knocks from the United States, especially economically, for that whole system to come crumbling down because it was a shell built for personal rule. Now Vladimir Putin is doing a similar thing. He's fallen for that similar trap. I already mentioned before that the West is super strong, and you should not be having this ambition of trying to go head to head against it. B, you're not giving political options to your people and not building a strong cadre of state, if you will, because it's all about personalized rule and you need yes men around you. And as a result, this is not going to last too long. Anyways, yes, Chuck, Imperius left. He said he would be back in a little bit. And our friend here, Mr. Orthodox Guy, is taking his dog out. And they left me on the panel, if you will. The last aspect that Mr. Imperius hopped in on was this aspect of the NPC, right? The fact that rather than think critically, people are going to call you a name. They're going to say you are this or you're that or you're a shield for this or you're this or that. And they're also looking for answers and they're also looking to be led, right? And this is 100% true. I was saying that this is the way in which the species propagates its culture. We are very mimic based. And one of the things that we copy is not just desires, but also hatreds, right? And I have this example that I say all the time regarding how we copy desires, which is the way in which the mechanism by which advertising works, by the way, is, all you have to do is just imagine that you are in a room with two kids, right? Or with one kid at first playing with some toys, right? Playing with a car and all these other kinds of things. And there's a red ball in the corner. This kid number one doesn't pay attention to the red ball, doesn't care about the red ball. Kid number two comes in and all they can see is the red ball. All they want is the red ball. They rush to the red ball. And all of a sudden, kid number one becomes desirous of the red ball as well because someone else wants it. This is the way in which desires are created. And by desires, I'm not talking about basic needs such as, food, clothing, shelter. Those are needed for the biological organism to continue. I'm talking about things such as red balls, iPhones, red bottom shoes, and all the other massive things that form the economy. So these things are copied by seeing other people wanting them, and then we want the same thing. Quote unquote, love triangles and all these other kinds of things are also a reflection of this. A woman is desirable because other people want her, right? A man becomes desirable. This is something that a lot of men know because other women want him, right? That kind of thing. It's a social game. It's a mimicry game. And we don't just do this for desires. We also do it for hatreds. We will hate what other people hate. This is the forming of the mob, the craziness of mobs. I talked about the casting of the first stone, right? By the time the mob starts throwing stones, it's simply a mimicry thing. You don't know why you're throwing the stones. You don't know why you're calling Orthodox Guy a shill. You don't know why you are starting to sound like a rabid dog vis-a-vis all these other kinds of things. It's just a copy. It seems like you're back, OG. I'll go ahead and I'll shut up.
No, dude, I was loving it. I'm sorry, Tucker tried to go play with the neighbor kids, and after him doxing me, we're not speaking. So I didn't want no fuck shit, so I had to go stop that. So I was a little bit later, but no, I've been here for a minute. I was liking where you were going, but let's get this video played. The producer lady doesn't like when I don't play her video. She'll beat me if I don't play it.
And when? Those are the two big questions surrounding President Trump's wish to have the leaders of Russia and Ukraine meet face-to-face to finally end this war. But today, the Russians are publicly sounding less committed to a meeting with the Ukrainians than President Trump had expressed. As Monica Alba shows us, this comes as attacks in eastern Ukraine continue to ramp up.
President Trump continuing to express confidence that the leaders of Russia and Ukraine could soon meet face-to-face to negotiate an end to their 3.5 years long war.
We're going to try and stop it, and I think we have a good shot.
But today, the Russians are throwing cold water on that. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov saying that talks between lower-level Russian and Ukrainian officials must take place before a sit-down between the country's presidents is set. Lavrov adding that discussions about security guarantees for Ukraine now taking place among U.S. and European leaders, but not the Russians, are a, quote, road to nowhere. Despite that, more than 30 NATO military leaders held a video conference today to talk about what security guarantees for Ukraine, which would satisfy both Ukraine and Russia, might look like. It comes after another intense night of Russian bombing in eastern Ukraine. Officials there say 60 drone strikes injured more than a dozen people.
The Russians have no interest, and they've demonstrated no interest in stopping this war.
Former ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, says Russia has no incentive to negotiate with Ukraine.
He said they're going to drag it out. They want to continue to pound the...
Yeah, you don't negotiate when you're winning. Of course. They're like he's ass mad that the people he don't like is winning. You don't have to negotiate when you win. You tell them what the fuck you want, and unless they're willing to commit. In America, we're not willing to commit. People don't want to go die for Ukraine. So like I don't see the issue.
Ukrainians until they get what they want, and that's why standing up to them is the only way.
Oh, also, hello, Gary. What's up, Arkansas?
To do it.
Some lawmakers now urging the president to get tougher on President Putin.
I think the only way to do that, if he does not move forward quickly with this summit or with a ceasefire, is with very strong sanctions.
The White House has not said where a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky could take place.
Yes, more strong sanctions. What's up, Bump? How you doing, buddy?
How's it going, buddy? We're talking politics today. Oh boy, you haven't talked politics in a while.
Yeah, I went on Bob's and Jay had asked me, did I watch? It was the same day they had the talks with Putin and Trump, and I haven't really been into the politics for like 2 months. It's been really good, but then I've just been seeing people talk shit about Russia here lately, and it's like, do you want a world war? Because it seems like you want a world war. Because like, Russia won't negotiate with Ukraine. Of course, Russia won't negotiate with Ukraine. They're fucking winning. When you know,
with the United States, let's say there's a random country that was being defiant to the United States that was right on our border. Let's say Mexico decided to start killing United States citizens, for instance, right? Randomly, do you think America would negotiate with Mexico at all? Do you think that would happen at all? Of course it wouldn't happen. Why would Russia negotiate? The only reason why this is a big deal is because NATO is making it a big deal. Because NATO and surrounding countries are making it a big deal. That's the only reason. No one likes war.
Like he doesn't want to talk politics, but he technically really wants to talk about them. No? I haven't really talked about politics that often. What were you saying, Bumpkin?
But yeah, it's very simple. Russia wants the resources, and Russia wants access to the Baltic Sea. And Ukraine is in the way of that. And for Russia to build themselves up stronger and build their navy stronger, obviously, they need access to that. And they need access to the resources that are in Ukraine. And also, Ukrainians are basically Russian. They're basically the same fucking culture.
They are literally Russian.
They're literally the same culture.
It's not Kiev, it's Kyiv. Kyiv is an English pronunciation, not a Cyrillic or Russian or even like the proper fucking pronunciation in Ukrainians' own language. It's always Kiev, because guess what? That's a part of Russia. They are genetically Russian. The Ukrainian language is a dialect of Russian. It is what it is.
Yeah, and I really don't care about this war or the war in Gaza, to be honest with you. I'm a little bit more invested in the war in Gaza because, I don't like the state of Israel. But This one, it's really like, I don't care. I mean, it's just like, it's really, really like, I don't care. American citizens do not need to go fight and die for Ukraine, and American citizens don't need to go fight and die on Russia's behalf either. America does not need to be involved in this conflict. I don't care.
I say the same thing for Israel or Palestine as well.
Yeah. I think there's
why don't you get on panel and argue with us a little bit if we're wrong, old man?
Oh, here comes the old boomer saying how we must be the world police.
I don't think Chuck would say that.
Well, you'd be surprised.
I think that he would give an honest take like Ike did.
I am just so tired of the foreign wars. I am just so tired of the ridiculous
forever wars.
Yes, the forever wars, dude.
Draining our population and treasury.
Draining our population, therefore, if our population can just get replaced by mass immigration. That's fucking ridiculous.
Well, see, we're going to see the repercussions of our actions very soon. Actually, the thing is, and here's the issue. Whenever if you say shit like race doesn't matter, right? You just take in culture, right? These people that from India, they're not compatible with our culture. They're parasitical in nature. Look at how Indians run CEOs. They kick out literally everyone who's not Indian and replace everyone who's not Indian. Many people would say, well, all that matters is profit. You know, that's cool until we live in a world where all that matters is profit. Until that actually means what they say it means, and then they don't like it. Because that actually destroys nations and people. Like, it's okay for individuals to have the mentality that everything's about profit, right? But when an entire nation or culture adopts that mentality because they're parasitizing off another society, and we allow it to happen as a society because these are our values, you know, all that matters is how much money you can make, right? And no one really asked, like, how come they're not able to do that in India? No one ever asked that. It's almost like they're allowed to come in because it's cheaper labor. It's not like there's any higher quality there. It's almost like they're brought in for specific reasons. But we won't go there.
Yeah, I'm tired of the forever wars, man.
Well, you know that you know, and then I bring this up because we're talking about the forever wars. We're talking about Russia and Ukraine specifically, but you brought up Palestine and Israel. The reason I even bring up the whole different race and different group, right? The Muslims in the UK have outright said they're not going to fight for the United Kingdom if a war breaks out.
Yeah, why would they?
And their stated reason, it's not our country. But yet when people like myself or Bumpkin speak, we get shouted, everyone can be an American. Okay, everyone can be an American when there's peace and prosperity and they can parasitize from it. No one wants to be an American when it's time to go to war. But Americans.
Let me say a couple of things on the things that have been said so far regarding, shall I say, assimilation, right? Mm-hmm. And ethnocentricity is a fact, right, of all peoples. And like everything else, there's gradations to attributes, including ethnocentricity. One thing that the Western liberal mind, and I don't mean just liberal in terms of left, right, but the Western mind, the Western average person tends not to understand is that the West is actually the least ethnocentric, right? And by the West here, I'm not talking about one particular, I'm talking about a set of traditions, meaning, Thucydides going out there writing about other people and shit like that, right?
Well, meritocracy being one of the most important not institutions, but cultural ethics, I would say.
Mhm.
And I
So
think that's one thing that does set us apart. I'm sorry, I'll let you rock out.
yeah,
I
yeah, no
apologize.
problem. You can go back all the way to like ancient Greece and the kind of things that they liked to study, comparative studies, if you will, of different cultures, which requires an open mind to do, by the way. Um, Secondly, you have certain historical facts, maybe because of the proximity and all the killing of each other that happened in Europe over maybe some religious wars or certain things like that, whereby they are not as ethnocentric, right? So everyone is ethnocentric, 100%, right? But people tend to forget that actually the West uh, described as this sets of attitudes and institutions whereby you have the scientific method and meritocracy and this, whatever, right? And it's not a white man thing; it's a thing that developed over all through human history, and but right now it's kind of uh, instituted in certain organizations and ways of being in what we call the West. And by the way, I mentioned Japanese being non-European, but they're Western, and for example, the Russians being white, you can even say European, but they're not Western, right? So this uh, kind of reduced ethnocentricity is an attribute of the West and a certain kind of openness. And think about it also as a desire for decentralization, right? And this is why, for example, we want to say things like, well, let's go spread some democracy. In other words, it's not completely crazy, right? Foreign wars aside, which is not my point, by the way, to try to defend foreign wars. I'm creating, as I typically like to do, some context here regarding assimilation, which I'll get to in a second, but I'm just talking about the openness of the West. Openness works for the West, right? We go in and we say, free enterprise, individual choice, because we know we will win at that because it is part of our system, right? In other words, you have systems that are decentralized, West, let's say, and systems that are more centralized, and you could call it communism or a monarchy or whatever the hell it may be. And these are questions of simple trade-offs. And it doesn't mean that the West is completely decentralized. No, it's just a question of, different institutions and what's primary and so on and so forth. Okay, so the decentralized mode, the mode of free enterprise, capitalism, democracy is something that the West benefits from. And that mode is less ethnocentric than most other people. So this is just to kind of disabuse people of the notion, oh, well, the West is just ethnocentric. It's like, shut the fuck up. You don't even know what you're talking about to begin with. Now, to the point of assimilation. Assimilation can happen. America is the best in the West when it comes to assimilation. But you need to take a bite of the elephant one bite at a time, right? So it's a question of simple physical limits. You cannot have just this crazy open border, for example, or not have a system whereby it's almost like saying, well, I need employees, so I'm just going to open my door and let the first 1,000 people that come in, come in, and then I'm going to shut the door and those are the employees. It's like, no, you would say, what skills do I need? Which sector of my organization do I need them? And so on. And also the time to digest and to make these people American, which is easy to do, by the way, because America is about, opportunity, right? So you don't have, it's not this kind of thing of, well, I need to be French and have this French history, or I need to be German. It's like, no, it's none of that. That's why America has been successful with assimilation, but you can only push certain things too far. The West works with decentralization, with open, meritocratic, and all these other kinds of things. This is the way this particular beast works, right? And decentralization is something that exists. It's out there. Decentralized intelligence, for example, represented by the economy or represented by the ecosystem, let's say, which a free market economy tries to represent the ecosystem of some kind of a Darwinistic competition, right? And then out of that comes out things such as prices for goods, which no one can calculate individually, but it's a result of billions of people making individual choices, that kind of crap, right? So that is the system that the West operates in. It's less ethnocentric, generally speaking, as long as the system works. And the assimilation can work, but it needs to be done programmatically. Those are the things I wanted to add there.
And while everything you were saying I would not disagree with, even though to some people it may seem with my statements beforehand I was, the thing that we are witnessing is a failure of the West to do the things that are good at, either through political correctness or the loss of the sheer will of the people. Right? The UK are not assimilating Pakistanis. They are making excuses saying, well, according to their culture, this is okay. So we should respect that. Some culture, I don't believe in racial superiority, but I do believe absolutely in cultural superiority. When the Hold on one second. I apologize for that. The thing is, like, when in India, when the Europeans, mainly the English, went there, they found out a barbaric practice that was done where women were killed and set ablaze at the funerals of their husbands. Right? Regardless of their health, regardless of their wishes. And the English nobility or the English elites that were there during colonialization violently repressed that cultural tradition. We should not respect lesser cultures. We should not respect cultures that lead to human sacrifice or that have human sacrifice built within them. There is a push in our institutions in the West, mainly our educational institutions, to treat all cultures equally. And it's not equally under the law like you're supposed to do with every person, because every person is not equal. They want us to treat every culture as if it has the equal as if it had an equal outcome for its people. And that's why in the UK they have roaming Pakistani rape gangs. Like I was watching China Uncensored on Twitter, and Moscow, somebody from Russia, I guess it was propaganda for Russia, was showing the difference between London and Russia, right? In two European cities, you see Europeans or white folks, however you want to put it, women not necessarily scantily clad, but they weren't in a burqa. And you see in one city, you see basically freedom and everything that the West say that they're for, which is Moscow. And then you see London with a bunch of people clad in burqa and living under what they're trying to assume is like Sharia law, right? It is bullshit as far as propaganda goes, because as far as I know, the UK hasn't enshrined Sharia law. It's allowed it to be pushed in certain no-go zones. Austria, their Supreme Court recently, as of I believe last week, enshrined Sharia law in some cases, was their Supreme Court's decision. But China Uncensored's reply to this was, do people really believe this BS? And I'm like, well, yeah, it's not because we're Russia shills. It's you have rape gangs of foreigners, and and when you have these foreign rape gangs, there are going to be people that participate in it that are not foreigners. So if you've got like 57% of the rape gangs are foreigners, and that's not the statistic, it's actually much smaller. I think it's like 3% in all actuality, but I digress. When you have this large amount of foreigners that are causing problems and not assimilating, and you're making it a part of their culture, saying it's just their culture for them to do that, we have to accept it because we have to change the culture. And that's what happens in Russia, or not Russia, but Germany. But you don't have these things in Russia. And like that kind of caught me off guard with the China Uncensored people. Typically they don't do that. And I don't know, man. Oh yeah, no. Russia does have ethnic struggles. Look at the Chechenian conflict. Like, I'm not saying that they don't have, like, nowhere is perfect. But what I'm saying is their ethnic struggles are for people that are from a certain region that want autonomy or their own self-governance, so they're fighting for it. They also had people that were forcefully relocated under communism, but that's a whole other thing unique to Russia. I mean, like, I would not kid myself and think anywhere is perfect. And I don't think that having a nation state that prioritizes meritocracy is bad, even if I am on the lowest part of that. Personally, I think that would be beneficial to everyone. But right now, the West is rejecting all of the things that Ike said, in my opinion, that Ike said made it great. Because if we actually were practicing meritocracy, I mean, I feel like we would be allowing the people within our country the first go. Because from my understanding, when I was in college, a lot of Indian students had to be sent back home and have their visas expunged. Not students, but engineers, because the India runs like very fraudulent degree programs within their nation. Like, it's a whole nation of fucking scammers, and I don't mean that to be derogatory or cruel. It just is what it is. Like most, like 90% of the world's scam calls from there, they scam not just the U.S. but anywhere that allows the equivalent of an H-1B visa. They run these fraudulent schools, and it just, I don't know. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm just speaking with hate, but I'm trying to get to the crux of it, you know?
The hatred is always assumed, OG, when you speak, but nonetheless, there are a couple, there are a couple of things conceptually that I wanted to introduce here. It's a question of scale, meaning at different scales, different things apply, right? This is true of physics, right? This is also true of all kinds of things, right? We know this. There's, somebody once says, quantity has a quality. Quantity is a quality all its own, right? There's a difference between 2 soldiers and 1 billion soldiers. It's not even it's a different, it's just a completely different thing altogether. So, just a couple more words on scale, especially on the physics side, and then I'll go into something here that has to do with politics. So yes, we do know that, on the tiny scale, there's quantum mechanics, very different from the scale which you and I operate in, which is kind of Newtonian mechanics. And then when you get to the really large and the really fast, then things break down to such a level whereby now you have to consider relativity. For example,
I think you give me too much credit. There are times when people like you and Mel talk, and I'm completely lost. I wish I knew the things you knew. I'm gonna be real. Like, this is why I believe in meritocracy, and that's why I said when we were talking about picking world leaders, I would pick either you or Chuck or Joe Cool over myself, to be honest, because your knowledge and wisdom far exceeds mine.
Well, you're still young, and you can't be compared. And I would say the other part. But the fact is, at least that there's something called quantum mechanics and there's something called relativity, and these operate on different scales, and it's because of the scale that these things are different, right? These are effective truths, if you will. Some are more fundamental, and then in between you have other kinds of truths, other kinds of equations. You don't need relativity or quantum mechanics to take you to the moon. All you need is Newtonian mechanics. And there's some kinds of also things that matter in terms of scale, such as communism works in your family, right? You don't want to be like, oh, it's pure meritocracy, bro, and capitalism in my family. And it's like, no. It's a question of scales and so on and so forth. And then you want things to be local works in local. And then the more you go outwards, outside of local, maybe you want to reduce power, right? For example, maybe you could be a tyrant in your home, but you don't want tyranny to rule over the nation, that kind of a thing. A good tyrant, obviously, a philosopher king, if you will. In other words, these are different scales in which different things apply. Same thing with this notion of meritocracy. Okay. If you come in and you have this idea of comparative advantage, like, hey, let the best country make the best stuff. Let countries specialize in the things that they make. And if I can get labor in China for XYZ amount and they are good and they do what they call 996, which is 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, fuck, I'm taking my factory over there, right? These are still operating under the meritocratic, competitive, and so on, right? However, when you do that at the scale of a country, you're going to be fucking up certain other things on the local level, right? Which you mentioned, for example, because you're going to be removing the rootedness, the trust aspect of your society, and so on. And it's going to become a capital versus labor battle writ large throughout the universe, which does not augur well for the strength of your society, right? So you can understand that capitalism operates on certain scales, but or in certain domains. Now let's remove scales. Scales before was just numbers, size that we've been talking about, but also within certain domains, one domain to the other. You don't want your art to be purely capitalistic. There's a reason why there's such a thing is called popular music, right? And if it's good, we're sometimes surprised that popular music is actually good, right? Because it's not supposed to be the best kind of music, because that's, you know, the market is not going to be representative, or it's not the best tool for selecting the best kind of art or the best kind of ways of stitching people together and forming communal bonds. You can't just leave it up to capitalism, as you said, like, oh, all that matters is profit, until all that matters is profit. Because when all that matters is profit, you get crappy art, crappy social bonds, and crappy everything. So within different domains and different scales, different political machinations and ways of organizing ourselves apply. And that's why I hate this kind of top-down bullshit where people just come in and say, oh, well, no, that's capitalism, or that's socialism, what I call definition talk, which is the stupidest thing that fucking exists, which, by the way, is also over 90% of the conversation that takes place in these places, right? You know, it's fine. I don't, you know, I don't participate in stupid conversations. Doesn't mean I don't recognize that that's what's going on most of the time. So people coming in and just using words and having word, you know, do little alley fights about words and definitions and stuff like that, rather than understanding that, look, different things operate in different scales and different things operate in different domains. What works in the family level is not necessarily going to work on the national level. The idea of meritocracy and competition that works on one level, if you take it to the international level, it'll lead to the gutting of your cities and the you know, and recreate a rust belt, and on and on and on, right? So it's not about some simple ism, right? And as we were saying before, things are always more complicated than even the smart, the intelligentsia, the people who participate in these definition talks, the bourgeoisie, if you will, think, you know, and they're just doing their large language model thing, repeating things that they're supposed to say, blah, blah, blah. But the overall thing that I added here was that scale matters, right? So you can say meritocracy and such, but okay, then you get to the level of nations, and if you follow that notion of comparative advantage, I'm only just going to produce this one thing and export it, and then I import stuff from everyone else. You're going to gut out your industry, right? Because you're not making anything, because you're just going to specialize in the thing that you're the best at. Well, that does not work for the building of a strong society, you know, blah, blah, blah. There's always trade-offs to that. So people talk about, for example, you know, reshoring industries, or, you know, factories and things like that. And yes, there will be a cost, and maybe it will be inflationary and so on and so forth. And I don't necessarily know what the best path is, because after all, decline is inevitable. At some point, the society will have to crumble, right? You know, nothing lasts forever. But you can at least try to, hey, you know what? Let me try and pay the cost that's associated with trying to revitalize my people, if you will.
I like that, and I think that you were able to explain better than I ever could when I say I'm a pragmatist, because like I only get lodged in the talk with the isms with capitalists and communists. Whenever I talk to real people, and we're talking about solutions, I'm like, no, bro, whatever's pragmatic. You know, I'm a centrist. We all saw on the political spectrum test, right? I'm smack dab in the center. Whatever is pragmatic to benefit the people of our nation is what I want to do at the end of the day. And I never really looked at it like the scaling issue, because when I first came out as a fascist or a national socialist, I was talking to my grandfather's brother, my great uncle, and he's like, "Well, that's all well and good in the home, but we can't do it as a nation." And you've kind of made me understand what he meant by that all those years ago. Now, like I get that, because yeah, it's a bit too complex to have a certain level of control outside of your own home.
Yeah, and things have a half-life, if you will. You can always do something for so long, right? And there's a wartime conciliary and a peacetime conciliary, whatever, right? So there are different modalities that one can take. So it's a question of, which is what pragmatism is about, using the right tool for the right circumstance, right? So you can't just be like, oh, well, you know, National Socialism all the way in all scales at all times and all circumstances. It's like, what the fuck, you know?
Yeah, no, that
There's no
that
such
would
tool.
devolve into totalitarianism or Führerism. That would be retarded. Like
Yeah.
that's why I don't like totalitarianism, because you can't control every aspect in your life. What makes you think the government can control every aspect of everyone else's life?
Yeah, and even shout out to libertarians. I know you like to dunk on them. Um, but a smart guy, Peter Thiel, says that libertarianism is an effective tool under certain circumstances, meaning when things are not working properly, right? Then you come in and say, hey, let's let's take away power from the government, right? It is not some kind of absolute thing. In other words, yes, you can imagine a government that is actually quite efficient, even though it's not going to be as efficient as certain other ways of organizing ourselves, corporate or whatever. But if things are not completely rotting away, take, for example, the government did do the Manhattan Project and certain other things. We have many examples of things that were done in the past that are now way more costly and cumbersome to do. There's all these examples of how much did it take and how long did it take to build the Empire State Building versus you trying to do it now. You build the Bay Bridge in California across the San Francisco Bay. How much did that cost versus fixing the Bay Bridge, right? And it cost twice as much in inflation adjusted dollars, and it's more cumbersome and filled with all kinds of red tape. So it is not the case that government necessarily has to be the way that it is in the latter part of the examples that I gave, right? But if you find it like that, then yeah, apply some libertarianism, right?
Yeah,
That'll be that kind of thing.
I'm glad you said that. I'll let you rock on because I'm loving what you're saying. I know I do dunk on libertarians a lot, but I feel like this is libertarian coded and it goes with what you're saying. And I just found it on Twitter. The Pluchet effect, the theory that predators would naturally be removed from society in the most accurate and efficient way if only governments would stop intervening on their behalves. And like this comes to a conversation. I want to get your take on it. Me and some friends were having a conversation on utilitarianism. See, when I first hearing the word utilitarianism, I think of something that's pragmatic, of it having utility in the moment, not the actual definition, which is defined what is good for the majority of the people is what's best for society. The trolley thing being the most effective, not the most effective, but the most famous question on utilitarianism that's out there. Like, what is your opinion or belief on utilitarianism? Do you agree, disagree? Because like a lot of our modern society is actually built upon it.
So utilitarianism, I would agree, is a branch of some kind of pragmatic approach. And that whole notion of the best, what's good for the most, is just one possible result. Some people think it's an inevitable result of applying utilitarianism to the entire body politic, if you will, right? So it's like, okay, what's the most practical thing? Well, and it's a question of, and it's practicality in terms of, there's a redistributive kind of like resource aspect to this thing, right? Like, okay, well, the distribution of justice, the distribution of goods and services, the distribution. Okay, well, what's the most practical thing? Who knows? Well, the best, whatever works best for the most, right? So it's like a simple kind of conclusion that one can draw from this kind of a pragmatic approach. However, I find it to be lacking in depth and so on, and as exemplified by those kind of thought experiments and situational ethics situations that you mentioned, with the rail or whatever. I find those things just kind of be bullshit. It's like, what the fuck does that even mean anyways? Like, that's not how life happens. That's not how people think. This is not, I'm not so much into thinking that we're rational beings, right? Which is what these, dare I say, situational ethics questions lead to. Like, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to ponder. It's like, no, that's not how things happen, right? That's not how things happen. There's a whole organism and a whole species that's doing its thing, and things happening that are beyond that. Now, overall, I like certain pragmatic aspects of things from a let me call it an epistemological point of view. In other words, from the point of view of knowledge, right? From the point of view of knowledge, I like pragmatism rather than a hyper focus on what's called rationality. Like, okay, I'm going to deduce what the good is. I'm going to deduce what is correct, right? A priori in a vacuum. It's like, no, we're going to look at circumstances. We're going to look at the way we evolved. We're going to look at everything. We're going to look at the fact that we have a religious impulse. What is that? What is this Godhold that we have? And so on and so forth. I'm not going to be like, rule all that out. I'm going to look pragmatically at what exists when determining any kind of value. In other words, where one should go, right? So that's where I like the pragmatism approach. However, when it comes to aesthetics, right? So no, I said, so these are branches of philosophy, if you will, if you want to be if you want to be a nerd about it. I said epistemology, meaning knowledge wise. I like empiricism. I like to think of everything, including what the good life is, to be a question of what life is, right? And what the kind of life that you're talking about, the human life, and its circumstance and its ways of being, and so on, as opposed to pulling it from some abstract place like someone like Plato will tend to do, right? However, when it comes to, like, shall we say, things like aesthetics, in other words, how should I live my life? Okay, then pragmatism doesn't really work as well, because pragmatism will lead you to focus on, and this is a person at this point, it's a personality thing. In other words, how I should live my life means how I should live my life, not you, right? And on that front, pragmatism would lead you to look at things such as your stomach, and focus on bean counting and things of that nature. I prefer a heroic approach to life, meaning the path least traveled, and things that are a little bit more artistic, if you will. Sometimes I call it a theocracy or God mode, right? A Nietzschean approach to life that says, I am going to go on the path less traveled. I'm going to do things artistically, creatively, including the creation, or to the degree to which I have any part to play in quote unquote soul craft, in the crafting of my own soul, right? It's not going to be about looking at the lowest forms of my desires, but I'm going to sublimate that to things that are quote unquote artistic, right? That, in other words, they're purposeless, which to juxtapose artistic versus pragmatic, because artistic art has no fucking purpose, right? You do it for its own sake. And you're going to live your life for your own purpose, for its own sake, as opposed to, well, I need to count 5 grains of rice and 22 grains of beans, and this is the way I need to get to those grains of rice and beans, and hence that's how I'm going to live my life, right? So again, but this is a personal thing, right? So what have I said so far? I've said that utilitarianism is a form of pragmatism, and that whole thing about the numbers is one of the very simple conclusions that people draw when they do a utilitarian calculation. I think that epistemologically, in terms of how to know things, I think that pragmatism is a great way, especially psychologically and other kinds of ways of in the social sciences, if you will, and in the looking of human development. We should look at what is actually there as opposed to some ideals. So pragmatism works great in that front. When it comes to individual living of your life and soulcraft, yeah, I throw out the practicality and all that kind of stuff, and it becomes a question of aesthetics and art.
That makes a lot of sense, but as far as would you say the success that you've garnered has allowed that type of lifestyle? Would you say if you weren't as successful, you'd be more pragmatic in your everyday encounters, or were you just like that before you found success? Do you think that was actually something that led you to success?
So you obviously, right, one knows that this kind of self-reported looking back and telling just so stories about one's life is always is fraught with all kinds of error and bias, right? So, but nonetheless, we go ahead and we do it, right? However, I'm going to say that no, these are questions of psychological makeup, right? That this idea of being practical in one sense and then being rather idealistic in another sense is a question of personality makeup. And I resonate with people like Ayn Rand and Friedrich Nietzsche, for example, because they're similar in that sense. So you could say that that thing leads to a certain kind of success, maybe, right? But I don't think that there was ever a time in my life, looking back, that I was not looking at my own personal being as kind of like an artistic endeavor, and then looking at everything else as a question of very pragmatic aspects of things, and then not valuing as much just raw logic for logic's sake, right? Just, I'm going to just try to, in other words, I can ignore bad code, lines of bad code, if the technical debt is going to get paid later on, and if after all it doesn't really matter, and we're going to get to the end. Hence, part of my reason for not really liking definition talk, right, or word thinking, for example, because I don't give a fuck whether you got the right definitions or not. What the fuck? I don't got the fucking time. Like who gives a fuck what's in your head? And you didn't dot the I over I don't care about such things, right? And those things are pure symbolic logic type stuff. But I'm more on the practical side of things, if you will. So I think it's always been there in this person of personality, and not so much circumstantial, if you will.
So you can correct me if I'm wrong. There's a time and place for everything, and it's kind of like a duality, right? There are going to be times in your life where you have to be practical, but I don't know where I'm going with that. My bad. My brain had a fart. I'm trying to comprehend.
Are you a student? I hate to do stupid shit like this, right? But are you a student of philosophy in any sense?
I like some philosophy, some I don't care for.
Go ahead, tell me what you like and why and so on, because I think that to the whole point of comprehending each other. Go ahead.
Even though I don't agree with it, I like utilitarian philosophy. I do like Nietzschean philosophy, what I know about it. I haven't really had time to study Aristotle or Socrates. Most of my studying has been like political philosophy, like the Republic. Let's see. I don't know, man. It's come to think about it, I don't really know anything. So I'm an open book.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trying to, with my very limited knowledge, put together what you were saying.
Yeah. So basically, if I were to say something rather simple, there are branches to philosophy, and it's just a question of the body of knowledge is based like this. There's something called metaphysics, which you could say is at the bottom, meaning what is the nature of things? What is, right? Some people call it metaphysics, some people call it ontology, right? What is the nature of things? And when you say meta, you know what meta means. It means what undergirds or what's behind, and then physics, right? So what is behind physics? What is real? What is the nature of things? Is there something? Is there nothing? Are we, to say, for example, do we live in a simulation, is a metaphysical question, right? So that's one level. And then on top of that, you have what you call epistemology, which is just a question of how you know things, right? Rationality is one way, meaning just simple deductive reasoning, for example. And then you have empiricism, and obviously you combine these two things together, work in the scientific method and blah, blah, blah. One can bring things such as revealed knowledge, whatever, but there's this whole thing of how do we know, how do we know, how do we know? And then you get into aesthetics, which is what is, let me leave aesthetics aside because it's one of those that, it's complicated, but people talk about ethics.
It's how it makes you feel, doesn't it? It's this sense of inspiring awe or inspiring doom you get from your environment, the culture, music, all of that plays an effect.
Exactly. And that is a philosophical thing as well, right? It does flow from your metaphysics and your ethics, even if you don't, from your metaphysics and your epistemology. Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm gonna be real. Like, there's a lot of things I've studied, but when you ask me about it, man, talking to someone with your intellect is intimidating. It's like, damn, like there's nothing I could say that is gonna impress this guy. So it's like I might as well just say I don't know shit. So like, so excuse the ignorance. Treat me like I'm retarded. I'm in learning mode, but I may have to leave you guys. Arkansas is in the back. I'm going to bring him up. I may have to leave you in a little bit. I do have to go to the store for my mom, but I do not want this shit to end. I'm going to be listening on my phone. If you feel like just talking, if not, we can end it. Because this shit, I love every minute of this, and I hope you don't get annoyed or bored with it. This shit is awesome.
You know what? Maybe we can end it because, I don't know. I don't know if.
I'm down to end it because I had a few questions for you, Ike. Because I used to read.
I don't have to go
Ayn Rand
right now.
So I do have some
thoughts
right
now, this moment.
But
just in about 10-15 minutes, I might have to be leaving whenever they get here.
Okay, cool.
Well, nice to
then let's then we can definitely continue. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say nice to meet you, Ike. I don't think I've met you in person yet, or not in person, of course, but online. I've
Yeah,
heard of
likewise.
you, but seen you before. But I just thought it was really interesting because you were talking about like the concept of like I always find it really interesting how aesthetics are tied to philosophy in that way, right? To where we don't think of how things look as having like an aesthetic quality to them, because like with like utilitarian buildings, you know, they're like think like commie blocks, right? Like in the Soviet Union, they had very blocky, you know, like apartments, right? Which were very efficient, but you know they weren't like super pretty. Where you have like, you know, really idealistic or you know, inside Europe at times, you know, you've had certain buildings that look a certain way. I don't know. I thought that was an interesting way of relating it.
Yeah. So let me say something and see if I can round it up. Some things are more vague than others. So, and it is, as a matter of fact, vague. The notion of aesthetics being a philosophical thing, meaning something that is grounded in what your vision of reality is, and how you know reality, and then your ethics and your politics, right? So again, OG, yes, there's the metaphysics, and then there's the epistemology, how do you know stuff, and then there's typically ethics and politics on top of that. Generally speaking, ethics and politics are not things that that's not my bag. Really, I'm a metaphysics guy. Really is what I really like to really study. And then straight from that comes a certain kind of sense of awe, which then feeds into my aesthetics. And I think that ethics is an aesthetic question. You know, I think that what I see as a bad behavior looks bad, feels bad, smells bad, right? That's why, not because of some logical table which you can give me, some utilitarian thing about, oh, it's because I think all those fall flat eventually. And this is just my particular makeup, which I do admit could be psychologically based. But having said that, right, that if you have a certain kind of view of the universe itself, then tied to that are going to be things that elate you and things that don't elate you. And this kind of elation that I'm talking about is an aesthetic thing. So one other way to tie it to our sense of even physics is, take for example, if you walk into a cathedral, right, and it is really tall and all these other kinds of things, and you're filled with awe of a certain sense.
Yeah.
And then you found out that it was made of styrofoam. What happens?
Yeah, and I think I was reading about this earlier today. I didn't read super into it. I was just reading it online. Have you heard of Agrippa's trilemma?
No, go ahead.
So he was a Roman skeptic, but he wrote about this concept of like you were talking about, like how a lot of it to you is like vibes, right? Because a lot of it, when it comes to aesthetics of like what's wrong, and because the thing is like it basically attributes that you can't come to like a moral conclusion necessarily by pure logic, right? You can't understand the world by pure logic. You're talking about like or like foundationalism, because essentially you just get into like a circular reasoning eventually, right?
Gödel's incompleteness theorem is another way of looking at it. Or you can generally look at Immanuel Kant's, and it doesn't matter what the names of these people are.
It's critique of reason is Kant. Because I read a bunch of Ayn Rand back when I was in high school, actually. And I always found that very interesting. But I do think she kind of is a little bit of a sociopath, maybe, but not really. But like some of the stuff I read from her is just, I remember reading it and being like, wow, that's like nuts. Like to the degree in which it was taken, right? Not necessarily like a more abstract. That the abstract, I struggled at times. I found some more issues with their stuff as I've grown older, but I have to revisit it to go into it more. But like even then, like I didn't have issues with the bones of it, but like it's like, you know, we should actually give Jeff Bezos even less taxes, right? And he should actually be president of the universe.
But here's so Ayn Rand, yes, you know, philosopher. She had an artistic bent. She was not the best novel writer, but her notion was to, kind of explicate her philosophy via the book she wrote, right?
Yeah.
And Atlas Shrugged being quite popular. The reason I'm saying this with the artistic stuff is because there's a notion of she's an activist of a certain kind. She's pushing back, and there's hyperbole involved. Because because in truth, the morality under which we live is group-based morality, meaning it's not necessarily based on the individual. It is based on go along to get along, is one way to put it. And in other words, for a certain kind of personality, an introverted, intuitive thinker type like she was, she knows she's in the minority, and she looks around, and people are constantly, it's perfectly the Atlas Shrugged example. Like, she's like, I'm the competent one, but no one ever cares what I want, right?
Yeah.
It's all about do good for you this, and your aunt and your grandma said this, and the blah blah blah. Oh, how could you do that? Or that stupid question which I hate, like, who does that? You know what I mean? People see you doing something and they say, who does that? I swear I want to fucking chop the fucking head off. And I hope you're not one of those people who says shit like that. But if it is what it is, right?
No, I don't say stuff like that. I just thought it was very funny how intensely that made you feel. I just thought.
Oh, this is the aspect I'm talking about in terms of like psychological makeups that I kind of resonate with.
I get what you're saying though. Is that I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, somebody is harassing you. Like, why do you talk about things online when you can just like watch TV? Like, why would you have a conversation when you can just like.
Yeah, like I'm like, motherfucker, who the fuck are you to even begin to talk to me or fucking ask me stupid questions?
Yeah, exactly.
Why
I know.
So?
Well, it's just, I think it's just people who are like 80 IQ, and it's just not worth talking to. I don't think I'm a super smart guy. I think I'm like middle of the road. But like, if you're just talking to somebody you just can't get it, there's no reason to try to explain it to them, right?
IQ is one aspect, but this thing that I mentioned regarding the group versus the individual, it does not necessarily fall down along IQ lines. You can have really high IQ people whom are very group oriented, right?
Yeah.
And Ayn Rand, seeing that this is the kind of prevailing operating modus operandi of the world, it's going to come in and it's going to take a particularly heavy hammer and smash against it, even in ways that you might consider hyperbole, so that the individual of a particular kind can have a voice, right? And say, no, you guys don't get to dictate morality to me simply based on what benefits you and how it makes you feel, and the who does that questions and the emotional blackmail shit that they do, right? So that's an aspect to consider when seeing some of her hyperbole.
That's an interesting way of looking at it, because I definitely did not look at it with that much nuance as a 17-year-old. I will say, I read it for kind of how it was, and I thought at times it was like seemingly a little, because I don't know. I do think we do have to work together with people, right? As much as it can be a pain, right? I do think what does push society forward is us working together. But you do need people who think out the box in order to put new ideas in, But I don't know. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I wonder what was I gonna? I just completely blanked. I'm so sorry. Have you read? I was going to ask you. Have you read Plato's Republic?
Correct. Yes, I have.
Because like I remember, I read it not too long ago. I'm like 24. I'm not that old. I read it in college, and I remember it being really. I really enjoyed it, even though just because some of it was so wild, right? Like he argues for, at one point it's like which I think he's correct in that he's like the biggest creator of inequality is who your parents are, right? Which I think is probably true, right? I mean, whoever raised you is essentially, or in the sort of sense which you're raised, you're probably the most influential thing. Not necessarily. There's lots of outliers. I'm not saying that, right? But there's always outliers. But he was talking about like how he argued that we should raise children communally.
Oh yeah. So okay. So Plato's Republic, very interesting book.
Yeah.
Now,
there's lots of just very interesting things in it, right?
Very interesting things and very interesting structure, and it does go all the way through to, you know, like talking about the individual. One of the major schemes of the book is to look at the individual and then look at the society, right? Like, okay, what's,
Yeah,
you know, because they thought about, yeah.
It was he. Do you know what a soy jack is? This is me being a zoomer.
What is it? What is a soy jack?
So soy jack's like it's like an image. You use it online to like make fun of somebody. Essentially, it's like calling somebody soy or whatever, right?
Soy boy, yeah.
Yeah, like a soy boy, right? But like you use the image and you depict their argument as the soy jack, right? And this is so dumb. I'm sorry. This is this is a little bit.
Yeah, but go ahead. How does it apply to Plato's? Go ahead, finish your.
But like he portrays himself as the Chad, which is the opposite of the soy jack, right? The Chad is like the super cool guy, right? He's the cool guy. He's the guy who's correct, right? Where you know the soy jack, and I feel like I remember while reading through Plato, I remember because I'd have to go grab my copy of the Republic. I wanted to pull out a specific example, but I remember like a lot of times he was like, whatever guy he was talking to, he'd always kind of essentially straw man his arguments, right?
Oh yeah, so yeah, Socrates was a hooligan. He was a scoundrel a little bit.
Well,
right? Yeah. Dare I say, you know, as exemplified by what is termed the Socratic method, the basic thing that he was trying to exemplify there. One of the book, as we said, you know, is complex and there are many things going on. But one of the basic things that Socrates was doing, as written by Plato, is to do that thing about asking questions about things that people say every day, right? Yeah. Somebody comes in and says, "Oh, I have a good whatever," and then Socrates says, "What is good?" You know, and he may know that this is an endless or pointless or circular thing, but let's talk about it, right? And in that includes all kinds of silly straw manning and whatnot to see, you know, where that goes, if you will, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think that you have to somewhat simplify arguments, because when making a point, it's not super easy. Like nuance is not super easy to argue with, right? Which is how the world really is, right? The world is nuanced, right? It's kind of one of the issues I have with, because I would generally say I'm a capitalist in that, like I'm not I don't believe in Marx or anything, but I think that the world was a lot more complex, right? Like in medieval economies, right? You had very differing levels of power, right? That were determining trade policy, right? From local levels to whatever the king takes off the top, versus the king might say, okay, this people have a monopoly, right? Where, like, you know, whenever we simplify the stuff down to capitalism or socialism, which is essentially just buzzwords, right? They're kind of meaningless terms deep down, right? It's whatever we give them the definition of, right? That's why, like, I do think you made a point earlier in the stream. I was just kind of listening in, and you were talking about how a lot of arguments devolve into definitions or arguments of definition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is so stupid. I completely agree with you. Right?
I'm sorry. I have a dono.
Okay.
So I gotta do the booty thing.
You gotta chill.
Oh, well, what have we got here? That's the poor box. It sure is.
Thank you, Midwest request. Let me see if they.
I want a seal. I like the seals.
Thank you, Midwest. You should salute. You should look into philosophy as you do. It often just don't notice it. And y'all go ahead. Y'all go ahead. Although I do think I might be having to end it. Give me 1 second.
Oh, that's fine. I was just enjoying the conversation, but it was nice talking to you. Nice to meet you, Ike.
I do have to end it. I'm more than willing. I'm only going to be going like 15 minutes. I'm more than willing to let y'all have the floor. If not, we can just end it.
I think I'm good to go, because I've got to go do some stuff, and then I'm going to start streaming at 8. So
okay,
let's have another one another time when the time permits and whatnot. But I think that this particular delivery was great. Started with Russia, talked about the context of the Eurasian Empire, and diverted and ended up in philosophy. I think that's a good chunk.
Yeah, I like this. I hope you're available for the next panel, because I have been enjoying you being on panel, man. You bring I don't know if the je ne sais quoi is the right word, but you bring a certain essence and style to the stream that I appreciate it. I love learning, and whenever you speak, I feel like I'm learning, man.
Yeah, no problem. I'll come in. I'll do my thing. I don't like getting in the way though. So I'll only, I think you know what I mean, right? So
Yeah,
I talk about what I like to talk about when the opportunity arises, but I'm not gonna get in the way of other shit.
You're so fucking, you're so good at teaching, man. Like you're so good at just breaking it down. Though. I like.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Arkansas, you got any final thoughts, good sir?
No, I think I will hop on at around 8 p.m. Central, but I'm just playing Jackbox, nothing deep. So
right.
if people want to join for that, they're welcome to.
Ike, do you have any final thoughts, or was that it?
No, that was it. Thank you very much for the panel and the discussion, the explication of various ideas. I'm looking forward to having more of this. And as I mentioned before, when you ask, why are people here? What did they? I'm an abstract person. What you see is what you get. This is what I like to do. I don't really, just the whole thing about people and shit and who said what to this person and blah blah blah. And I'm not talking about what other people may like. I'm saying, but that's not what I'm here to do at all, right? Like I don't give a fuck about any of that stuff. I could play, and donate to make Landry annoyed and whatnot, right? But just saying that I appreciate this channel for the fact that, as I call it, you do and appreciate INTP shit, and I'll leave it at that.
Right, can you
I do appreciate you making Landry cry. What's up?
Can you send Ike a soy jack and a Chad Wojak so you can explain the difference to him for me?
I think you should come up. I think you should come up and do that next time. But I do have to go. The person's waiting.
Okay, all right. We'll see you. All right.
Peace.
Bye.
Love all of y'all. I appreciate it. I'm sorry that I had to end the stream because Ike was putting down a good message, teaching him and Arkansas were having a great conversation. I hope we can have more of that over here. I guess I'll go live tomorrow, later tonight, or tomorrow morning. You never know with me. It depends on if my insomnia messes up. But I don't want to keep the person waiting, so I don't have time for long. Goodbye. I love all of you. I appreciate it. Please come back later. Thank you very much. I have to bounce.
Hatred and violence that they keep and everything is gonna There was me, that is Alex, and my three Jews, that is Pete, Georgie, and Dim. We sat in the Clover notebook trying to make up our Orthodox what to do with the evening.
Motherfucking Orthodox Guy, motherfucking Doc Guy. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Hey, what happens when you bring 9 soldiers from Brooklyn together?
Listen, if we don't stick together, we're not gonna get anything done.